This is Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Adam Carolla.
Garrigus in studio again for Beyond Reasonable Doubt.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm not going to slug you in the arm this time.
Update on the Chauvin
trial. So for those of you who are following this trial, and apparently I saw a survey yesterday that approximately 58% of the country is either closely or somewhat closely following the trial, and 48% believe he's guilty already. Mm-hmm. And so I thought maybe we just do a Beyond a Reasonable Doubt and we can give our thoughts.
I want to tell Gary to find that Ilhan Omar thing I sent to Chris, I believe, just for the future. Yeah. I forgot to give you a heads up. Go ahead.
So one of the things that I think the headlines we're taping this on Tuesday. We're going to drop on Tuesday. One of the headlines was that the police chief had said the force was completely unnecessary, wasn't within policy, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
That was the headline. If you had actually stayed around to watch the cross-examination, which is, or if the media had reported on it accurately, you would see that the defense lawyer did what a defense lawyer is supposed to do, by the way. For those of you, let me just do one caveat. A defense lawyer is supposed to zealously defend his client, whether he's a cop, whether he's a accused murderer, whether he's an accused whatever. You're supposed to, your duty is, under our system, to zealously defend. So those of you who say, I hate him, he's doing this or that, no, that's the system and that's the way it's designed, and you don't want it any other way. Trust me. And as much as I have I give no quarter to police, it doesn't matter, because if you make bad law with them, it's going to be bad law for everybody. And I say this because yesterday people were saying, well, it's basically game over. The police chief said that he was outside of policy. The Eric Nelson, the lawyer, got up and asked him, you're talking about employment, aren't you? And the chief says, yeah. He says, well, you're talking about employment decisions. Yes. That's why you fired him from his employment. Correct. That wasn't saying you're not making a legal determination, nor could you, as to whether this is under a criminal standard. And the chief conceded. Then he asked something I thought was interesting. He started reading from the training policy. Mm-hmm. And he read from the U.S. Supreme Court case and led the police chief through. Number one, the chief hasn't arrested anybody on the beat in years. Okay,
right.
So he's giving his opinions, but the chief has not arrested anybody in years. Number one. Number two, the U.S. Supreme Court, bless their heart, has given the police free rein to use the kind of force they deem necessary and not be subject to 20/20 hindsight. Something I've been fighting against for years, but that's the law of the land right now. None of that. Did you know any of that? Did you see any of it?
I watched CNN last night. They had a couple of, in-house lawyers, and they were just proclaiming victory. They, put the chief up. The chief disavowed this activity, and his own men, his own people have turned on him, and it's a done deal. That's what I saw.
And by the way, for those of you who think, well, how could Mark be taking this position? Let me reiterate what I said last week, and what I just alluded to. The biggest problem with the criminal justice system is that bad cases make bad law, and then they get applied across the board. The idea of asking people about their feelings, while cathartic for the country, I understand that. It's very cathartic for the country. To then have jurors understand that if they vote not guilty, I don't care if it's this case or any other case, I'm talking about cases I've been involved in, that the country is going to burn. That's not a good way to administer criminal justice when I'm sitting next to some pro bono case that I'm defending where there aren't any resources and the government's run amok. Because mind you, these prosecutors will do the same thing when the TV cameras aren't on to somebody who you might identify with.
So your summation is we're really getting one version of this from CNN and many of the other news outlets as to what's going on inside that courtroom.
CNN and MSNBC, in my humble opinion, have been an abomination on this case. I don't even understand what they're doing. The cheerleading for the prosecution. I used to condemn Fox News for doing this 20 years ago when Fox News would be cheerleading for the prosecution. Now I'm watching before my very eyes. MSNBC has decided they're not even going to talk about presumption of innocence.
Well, in Gary, you can look for Don Lemon's show last night because that's where I saw it at the beginning of his show. He had a couple of attorneys on, and they were just talking about they weren't doing what you would like, because what you would like from the qualified attorneys is doing a little he said, she said, doing a little here's what happened, here's why it's good, here's why it's bad. Well, and also maybe don't even approach it from the presumption of we'd like this guy to be guilty out from Jump Street. You know what I mean? Just come on and start dictating what happened in the courtroom.
I just don't understand. I sat and watched, I believe it was C-SPAN last night, because I could not get, I flipped every station. There's now a news night, WGN has turned in, they've got 4 or 5 hours. I couldn't get anything on there. In fact, they had a couple of lawyers on that was just an abomination. I turned on CNN, I turned on MSNBC. Fox, I don't even know what Fox was showing. It was something, border crisis or something. They can't be bothered with this, right? So, but the CNN and MSNBC, it used to be a liberal position that the media held the prosecution, because the prosecution, by the way, is the government. You held them accountable.
Right.
So I don't understand what has happened here. I understand that Derek Chauvin is despicable in the eyes of everyone. I get that. I've defended how many times have I defended the most hated man in America for that 5 minutes? But that is not what our system is set up for. And this is just, what is happening here is just, let me talk about, let's go macro for a second. We'll get off the Chauvin trial. But in a general, and you tell me how dangerous this feels to you. We have the judge up north who sentenced the kid from Stanford or Cal or whatever. Persky?
Right. And then the guy got thrown out, and then they went after his job as a, tennis pro or something like that. It got thrown out of the country club, whatever. Then you're some lawyer, and you say, I'm going to represent Donald Trump in the impeachment thing, and then they launch a campaign to get your law firm shut down. And if you were a lawyer and you went on CNN and you said, look, I'm going to tell you some points that the defense made here today. It's not all just points that the prosecution scored. You would be blackballed from CNN and maybe run out of your community. So is it actual reporting, or is it all just fear-based? And then think about the consequences of judges and attorneys. Think about the consequences of attorneys not wanting to represent people that are unpopular, and judges thinking about all sorts of ramifications outside of the courtroom before they render a judgment. Social ramifications. I got to think about my wife, or my kid goes to a private school. I don't want to be harassed. Think about how polluted the system would get.
You just hit on, I forget the code section. It's in the B&P code. I want to say 6068, but I could be wrong. But when you swear to take an oath as a lawyer in the state of California, and I assume it's the same everywhere else, you swear that you will not decline a client based on reputation, unsavoriness, whatever you want. You swear an oath to that. And so for all those who believe in the Constitution, all those who believe in democracy or pro-democracy, I get you. I feel you. But at the same time, you can't denigrate or just eliminate somebody because they are doing what their oath is. Even if your oath is unpopular, how many times I've been on the receiving end of the most unpopular defendant, but I didn't want to watch a clusterfuck of people taking somebody. I've said for years when people said, why did you take Scott Peterson, for instance? Because I went through it with that. It said, I was a commentator, and I famously said there's more evidence on him than a lot of guys who are in state prison. But then I saw him being driven into the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department and a mob scene. And I said, I remember talking with my old man then, and he said, this isn't America. This is bad. And that's why I took it, the underdog. I mean, I don't always go for the underdog, God forbid, but the system is supposed to be designed so that jurors render an opinion that's based on the evidence, not on kind of feeding the Christians to the lions.
We have the beginning of a Don Lemon show that I watched last night. And we'll see what his attorney experts thought about the police chief's testimony.
Joining me now is CNN senior legal analyst Laura Coates and political commentator Bakari Sellers. Good evening to both of you. Good to see you. Laura, I'm going to start with you. Today, the Minneapolis Police Chief testifying that Chauvin's actions were in no way, shape, or form part of their department's policy or training and, quote, certainly not part of our ethics or values. How powerful was that testimony?
This was incredibly damning. I mean, the word that sticks in my mind is Sarah's, encyclopedic knowledge. You're talking about a contrast from last week when the defense strategy was, hey, this veteran lieutenant who oversees homicide, you really have a kind of an out-of-touch status here. You don't really know what use of force looks like any longer in a very patronizing sort of way. This is the person who sets the policy. This is the person who has had such a breadth of experience that there's no way you're going to be able to tell him what the training looks like, what the policy is. And having this person, after multiple members of the law enforcement community, distance themselves from Derek Chauvin and essentially say, he's not one of us. What he did was not what we do. And making that very important leap that a prosecutor has to from reasonable use of force going over the line to now criminal assault. Remember, that has to be part of the underlying element that is proven, that there was a transformation, a conversion from reasonable use of force to criminal assault. They're building a really good case for that.
Attorney Bakari Sellers.
Can I just comment on that, first of all? And I like Laura Coates. She's very sharp. However, Laura, you just heard Don read directly what he said. It's not our ethics or values. By the way, he's not on trial. Nobody's on trial for violating your ethics or values. That the ethics and values may be codified in a statute, but you're not sitting there opining on ethics and values. This is this week's outrage. Last week's outrage is, how do you feel? How did this make you feel? I understand that this is cathartic for the country, but at the same time, this kind of jumping on the bandwagon of not completely unmoored from what the criminal elements are of what's being tried is dangerous fool's errand.
We have the other
and
attorney,
Bakari Sellers, who I also like a lot.
Oh, sorry. Do we have Bakari?
6 members? Well, you're an attorney, right? I mean, I'm not.
Yeah. I had to take the bar, yeah. I'm not giving that back.
I think it's important for people to know that, and that's why you're here speaking about it. So 6 members of the Minneapolis Police Department have now taken the stand in this trial for the prosecution against Chauvin. What kind of a message does that send to the jury?
And I think that's really powerful because in many of these cases, you don't see law enforcement testifying against one of their own. I mean, it started off where you had the EMTs come forward and testify, but you've had sergeants, commanders, and now the chief of police speak out against someone who is a member of their own ranks. We cannot discount how powerful that is. And one of the things that the prosecution has done is they have followed through with their promise that they laid out in opening arguments. Many times prosecutors get tripped up when they make an argument in opening and then they don't follow through. But here, day after day after day, they've continued to build that case, and it was so strong that it's very difficult to see. I practice criminal defense. It's very difficult to see how a criminal defense attorney can wiggle his way out of a guilty verdict on any one of the charges that is present before the jury. Because we do know, based upon the testimony today, that nothing he did was reasonable. And so that's when you start to teeter out of this scope and you start to recognize that there was some malice, that these words that are very important when it comes down to intent, there was recklessness, there was wanton disregard. All of those things matter because he was not following the proper procedure and protocol, and they laid that out. Last week was about compassion. It pulled at our heartstrings. But today was probably the day where the prosecution truly got themselves a guilty verdict if they're able to get it.
This is, this is.
All right, so it's not commentating anymore. It's cheerleading.
No, and by the way, Bakari just said he practices criminal defense. Bakari, let me I love you, but let me instruct you on something about criminal defense. When you say he couldn't wiggle his way out, if you had watched the cross-examination, you would have heard that the chief conceded he hasn't been on the streets arresting somebody in years, period. You would have heard that the chief said these were employment decisions. By the way, he's under oath and he has to justify his employment decisions because he's the one who fired the 4 guys in the first place. So if you had listened to the cross-examination, you would have, as somebody who holds himself out as a criminal defense lawyer, said, wait a second here, maybe we are conflating employment decisions with the elements of a criminal case.
I have a Ilhan Omar. Where is that? Chris doesn't have it?
Chris says it was never sent to him.
Well, then you know what? We'll stay tuned for Saturday, and we'll do it then.
I sent it. Oh, I thought I sent it to you, but maybe I didn't. I sent it to Mark.
He sent it to me. In fact, I saw you an hour later as I was walking on the street with you and your kids.
Yeah. Well, speaking of walking on the street, I passed a painter on the street today, and he said, he was listening to my podcast. And he was standing by his van. I said, oh, thank you. And then he said, Mark Garagos just walked by this house yesterday, and he yelled, what kind of circus is this? Because he had one of his guys hanging off the roof painting a dormer. All right.
All true.
Well, I think we got you guys caught up on a nice Beyond a Reasonable Doubt episode. We'll keep these coming as the trial unfolds because we're committed to you, the listener, and excellence. Until next time, it's Adam Carolla for Mark Garagos saying mahalo.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Tune in next Saturday for an all-new episode.